People love money. People love what money can bring them. Rich and poor, most people want more of it. Greed is good, was the cynical statement coined in a movie many years ago. Most of the time we would not be so brash as to, say it that way. Most of us, though, would like more than we have, or want to be sure that what we do have is not going to go away or be taken away. At the time of the writing of Ecclesiastes, the nation of Israel was in transition from a war footing under King David to being a commercial power under King Solomon. Trade was being opened up with the surrounding nations, and many of the nations around Israel were also making huge strides in material wealth. Ports of Israel were busy with sea trade. Solomon ensured the safety and success of many business ventures. This basic expansion raised the expectation and the hopes of most Jews. They saw new wealth being brought in and being generated. As the cities in Israel grew, so did the middle class, and the opportunities for the ordinary person to attain a level of wealth not accessible before. And Solomon himself was fabulously wealthy. Observing his own heart led him to look out at the growing wealth of his country and his people. And he made some real-world observations about loving money and gaining wealth. In doing so, Solomon spoke more about God in these verses than he has in any preceding it. Now, if we're going to live as Christian realists in the world, we need to understand about loving money and gaining wealth. This sense of what is real in the world prepares us to hear Jesus and the New Testament talk about wealth as well. Now, Solomon wrote this book in his own language using structure of thought and literary devices that were common to his own language, Hebrew. We have an interesting structure to our text I want us to keep in mind as we work through the material. Chapter 5, verses 8 through 12, and chapter 6, verses 7 to 9 are parallel to each other. They are a people who cannot be satisfied. Chapter 5, verses 13 to 17, and chapter 6, verses 3 to 6 are parallel. Here are people who cannot enjoy. But then chapter 5, verses 18 and 19, chapter 6, verses 1 and 2 are contrasts. What is good and what is bad. In chapter 5, verse 20, in the Hebrew way of thinking, is the point. And basically he says, enjoy the moment. Well, this helps us to see why, as we work through the text as it's written for us, that some things are repeated here, but then they have a different emphasis. We are going to be challenged to think about money and wealth with a piercing realism. When we come to the New Testament, we hear warnings that challenge our hearts so that we are not merely, like Ecclesiastes, world-wise, but we are heaven-wise on this issue of wealth. Now, Solomon begins by observing the growing prevalence of oppression in his culture, verses 8 and 9. Here is the gain of wealth by oppression. Here he connects the gaining of wealth with the oppression of the people. Verse 8, he writes, "If you see in a province the oppression of the poor and the violation of justice and righteousness, don't be amazed at the matter, for the high official is watched by a higher, and yet there are higher ones over him. But this is gain for a land in every way. The king is committed to cultivated fields. Now the problem here we all recognize, yes, here are corruption by officials. Corruption by the local government people had become a significant problem. It was taking place predominantly in the provinces and the villages, away from the cities. There, the demands on the people had become a huge burden. Solomon's not surprised to find this. He reminds us that we should also not be amazed at it. The very nature of government in a commercial transaction is to increase the demands until people suffer. Solomon traces it to the administrative bureaucracies that are the lot of governance. Because of the demands of free people at the top, more and more is required of people at the bottom. And the world has not changed one little bit. This leads eventually to oppression. People must produce more and more, whether crops or goods, to satisfy the demands of the governing officials. And the people may not be forced by power of weapons. A much more common tool are taxes and the threat of law. The solution? Well, the solution lies in the king's own example and commitments. He is primarily focused on keeping all the fields cultivated. He is not himself pressing the demands for the product, but rather on freeing the people to be as productive as they can be. This simple shift in focus was seen by Solomon as the solution to the corruption that will infest a bureaucracy. Don't go after product, go after people being able to accomplish what they can. But more importantly, the full cultivation of the land means that there will be land for the poor to glean from. Under the Mosaic law, farmers were not allowed to make multiple passes over a field so as to pick up every bit of what was being harvested. The leftovers from a single pass over a field were to be left for the poor. Fully cultivated fields left more for those who lived by gleaning. This decreased the opportunity for them to be oppressed by the government, since they would no longer be dependent on the government. In the real world, there will be corruption and bribery and falsification of documents and results and so on. And this will all be in the name of increasing wealth. Comes from defining wealth as being only in what is produced for consumption, but rather Solomon implements a solution that will increase wealth, not just at the expense or through the oppression of the person actually producing or making the goods. And so he notes that not to be surprised that you will find a problem of oppression in an economy that is growing. Secondly, though, he notes that the satisfaction by wealth is elusive. You see, God has designed us to want more of Him. But we are adept at taking good gifts and substituting them for God. Therefore, we are never satisfied, no matter how much of them we have. Verse 10, he who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with income. This also is vanity. When goods increase, they increase who eat them. And what advantage has their owner but to see them with his eyes? Sweet is the sleep of the laborer, whether he eats little or much. But the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep. Just that last sentence is just so interesting. Now I see three principles that simply are true when we love money. First, love of money decreases satisfaction. God has designed us to require more and more of something we love in order to be satisfied. This is the way God built us as humans. This is because we were commanded to love God above all and to love neighbor. Therefore, loving God and loving neighbor were basically designed to be insatiable appetites. This was designed to be a good thing. But we live under the sun. We live in a fallen world full of sin and limited resources. Now that principle simply operates on everything we love. We love money, then we will be less and less satisfied with the money we have. The more you love money, the less you will be satisfied with what you have. And secondly, the increase of money increases the desire. The principle also means that the more we have of something we love, the more we want of it. The more we have of God, the more of Him we want. That's a good thing. However, the increase of money also increases the desire for it. The more we eat, the more food we want. The more pleasure we have, the more pleasure we want. The more money we have, the more money we will want. Just the making and accumulating of wealth will increase the hunger for more. These are simple, functional, God-designed truths in a fallen world. That means that these then can lead to and can be an expression of sin and sinful desire. The fundamental problem here then is not the acquisition of more wealth, but rather the loving of wealth. God is fabulously rich, right? But He does not sin in His wealth. And thirdly, a principle comes here: contentment with toil brings rest. Love of money decreases satisfaction. The increase of money increases the desire for it. But contentment with toil brings rest. In a striking image, Solomon points to what we all know is true. There is a deep contentment that comes with productive toil. Both the tiredness of the body and the clearness of the conscience allows the labor to sleep well. But the excesses of the rich lead to stomach problems that inhibit sleep. The rich cannot sleep well in this image. It's a grotesque image because of the size of his stomach. Again, the solution is in contentment with our work, not in measuring necessarily its results. Sleep will come to the worker, but may well elude the wealthy. The third thing that Solomon observes as negative about gaining wealth is that the squandering of wealth is an evil. Verse 13 through 17, there is a grievous evil that I have seen under the sun. Riches were kept by their own owner to his hurt, and those riches were lost in a bad venture. He is the father of a son, but he's nothing in his hand. As he came from his mother's womb, he shall go again, naked as he came, and shall take nothing for his toil, that he may carry it away in his hand. This also is a grievous evil. Just as he came, so shall he also go. What gain is there to him who toils for the wind? Moreover, all his days he eats in darkness and much vexation and sickness and anger. Now notice the cause of its loss. Solomon observes what he calls a grievous evil. Though money can lead to oppression, will never satisfy, it is also a sin to misuse money. There are two evils identified here. One is simply the piling up of money rather than wisely putting it to use, and the other is the foolish use of money that ends up frittering it away. What is highlighted here was the putting of the whole inheritance into a single investment that failed. Money is not an end to itself. It is a stewardship that is put to wise use, to continually misuse it, so that it is wasted away, is evil. This is true, whether at the personal or at the corporate level. So he piled up money for himself, took it all, put it in a bad investment, and now, what's the problem? The Jewish culture, he has nothing to pass on. Here is the concern with the loss. He will have no way to provide for his children. He has a son who now will have nothing. The folly of the father has left the son destitute as well. So the concern is also that the person will leave nothing for his children. For the Jewish family under the Mosaic law, inheritances were a part of a sacred trust. Inherited land was protected by law from being permanently sold. Parents were to try to lay up for their children. Even the poor were expected to leave something for their children, but it often did not work out that way. The simple reality is that few people do well with their money. Most waste it away. And while we do not live under the law, nor do we have this moral obligation to leave something for our kids, most of us want to, and most of us hope to. Well, the consequence of its loss. See, the point here is to remember that there will be consequences because of our choices. You see, this man now has nothing to show for the life he lived. All the man's hard labor and painful toil does not produce a living wealth. He came into the world with nothing, and he will go out of the world leaving nothing. Often people who have loved and toiled for wealth become very depressed when it is lost. And often people who have loved and toiled for wealth become very depressed at the end of their life. Picture in verse 17 is so common, it's almost easy to miss it. Foolish investor, after years of toil, now sits alone and angry and depressed and penniless. He is full of agitation and vain regret. Idea of vexation. If only begins to consume him. Instead of returning to profitable work, he sits in darkness and depression, bemoaning his misfortune. But now, Solomon turns a corner. He's shown us these three bad aspects of wealth, but now he turns a corner, and in verses 18 through 20, he talks about enjoyment of wealth as a gift. Because if we stop here, right, it leaves us with this really sour taste in our mouth. And if we're not careful, then we as Westerners, we as Americans who are even in our world, our time, we are wealthy, might leave us a little uncomfortable. But Solomon, who was himself wise and wealthy, looks out over the world and says, let's think about this. Here is not the end of the story. There is something else that we must understand in this age, in this world, yes, even under the sun. The enjoyment of wealth is a gift from God. Verse 18, he writes, "Behold, what I have seen to be good and fitting is to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun, the few days of his life that God has given him, for this is his lot. Everyone also to whom God has given wealth and possessions and power to enjoy them and to accept his lot and rejoice in his toil, this also is a gift from God. For he will not much remember the days of his life, because God keeps him occupied with joy in his heart." I want you to notice, first of all, that it is fitting. It is appropriate, fitting, and proper to enjoy what God has given you, to enjoy the hard work that God has put in your hand, and then to enjoy what God has given you as a result of that hard work. Sometimes we as Christians are put on this A little bit of this phony guilt trip. Your days and your lot are determined by God. We should be realistic in accepting it, enjoys it. And yes, we are to guard against loving money. We are to guard against making things our treasure. We are to use money wisely and well, and we are to realize how easily money can grab our hearts. But we also may enjoy, in fact, we are encouraged to enjoy the fruits of our labor. Whether we have little or much, we can enjoy our work, and we can enjoy its fruits in the world. And secondly, why? Why can we do this? Well, because it is from God. Now, we are not here espousing a health and wealth gospel. God does not promise you health and wealth in this life. There is no name it and claim it. There's no word of faith to compel God to move on your behalf. But what you do have, whether little or much, is given to you from God. He has marked out the days of your life. He is putting into your hand what you have. You are to be diligent in your work, and you are to be careful in your stewardship. Now, this next sentence is a little difficult. I had a little bit of a hard time coming up with a word that captured it, and finally I settled on engaging. Commentators struggled with this difficult sentence, particularly with the immediate context. But I think that what Solomon is observing is that life will seem short because God engages the heart and occupies the person through the joy he has given. Part of the way God gives us joy is through the things he has given us to enjoy. Life will seem long and dreary and unbearable when our hearts are not occupied with God and the wonderful gifts that he gives. While the text doesn't say so directly, this is the function of gratitude. When we see what God is doing, joy will overflow in our hearts in all situations. Now, so the enjoyment of wealth comes as a result of it being a gift to us from God, our labor and its result. But there is something to remember. The enjoyment of wealth is limited. Chapter 6, verses 1 to 6. Do you get a sense of the sort of realism in this text? Watch out for how wealth harms people and will destroy you. Do enjoy what God has given as a gift from him, but do take note. The enjoyment of wealth has boundaries. Chapter 6, verse 1, he says, "There is an evil that I've seen under the sun, and it lies heavy on mankind. A man to whom God gives wealth and possessions and honor so that he lacks nothing of all that he desires. Yet God does not give him the power to enjoy them, but a stranger enjoys them. This is vanity, it's a grievous evil. If a man fathers 100 children and lives many years, so that the days of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with life's good things, and he also has no burial, I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. For it comes in vanity, and it goes in darkness, and in darkness its name is covered. Moreover, it has not seen the sun or known anything, yet finds rest rather than he. Even though he should live 1,000 years twice over, and yet enjoy no good. Do not all go to one place?" Well, what then rightfully limits our enjoyment of the good things that God gives? First, God may simply withhold the enjoyment. Verses 1 and 2. This is a startling sentence. Sometimes God does not grant the enjoyment to all. For some, he withholds it. Solomon makes no distinction between believers and unbelievers. He simply observes that some people have great wealth, and yet God is not giving them the ability to enjoy it. God is sovereign. God can do whatever he wants. He does not have to explain, does not have to give you an account. It is simply a fact in this world, under the sun, that sometimes God withholds from wealthy people the ability to enjoy what he himself has given them through their labor. There's a limitation, isn't it? Secondly, a man may refuse the enjoyment. Verse 3. The second reason it may be limited is that people simply refuse to enjoy it. This refusal is rooted in not being satisfied that God gives them. Solomon sees this as sad as a stillborn baby. There is all the potential, but none of the realization. A person who remains unsatisfied with God's good provision is intentionally refusing to enjoy what God has given. But then verse 4 through 6, here is the ultimate limitation. Everyone dies. And in view of the fact that everyone dies, we understand then that enjoying even what God has given us in this life under the sun is going to come to an end. Everyone will go down into the darkness of death. The end of life. There is no enjoyment of the good God gives and the wealth attained by work. To fail to realize this will prevent us from pleasing God and the joy He has given. And then he comes full circle in verses 7 to 9. The appetite for wealth is a vanity. He writes in verse 7, all the toil of man is for his mouth, yet his appetite is not satisfied. What advantage has the wise man over the fool? And what does the poor man have who knows how to conduct himself before the living? Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the appetite. This also is a vanity and striving after the wind. I see two important things here. First is the wisdom of seeing. To truly see, we will be truly wise. We will live with earthly realism and, as a result, with godly restraint. We will be mastered by God and not by our appetites. Then it will not matter whether we be rich or poor. What matters will be that we enjoy God and the good gifts that He gives. And then he also concludes by reminding us of the vanity of wanting. There is an emptiness to our desires, to our wanting. Even the wise man in this world who does not understand his appetites is no different from the poor man. So it is ever so much better to see and understand this world than to crave and to be mastered by this world. So what do we learn from this section of Ecclesiastes? Three important lessons. People who pursue wealth in and of itself will not be satisfied. And secondly, it is evil when people do not enjoy the life and the good that God has given them. And that might surprise people. And thirdly, we are to enjoy God's daily gifts to us. I have a long quote here from Sidney Greidanus. He writes, we can spend our life pursuing wealth. This never satisfies. In the end, may well lead to disaster. Or we can focus on enjoying God's gifts every day. And instead of pursuing wealth, the teacher encourages us to enjoy God's daily gifts. In the New Testament, Jesus also gives us a choice between these two ways of life. He teaches us no man can serve two masters. For a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one, despise the other. You cannot serve God and at the same time serve wealth. Jesus also warns us against spending our lives in the pursuit of wealth. He cautions us, take care, be on your guard against all kinds of greeds, for one's life does not consist in the abundance or the overflow or the sum total of his possessions. And Jesus offers the alternative of greed. Do not work for the food that perishes, Jesus says, but for the food that endures for eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. But should we not work hard to earn our daily food and drink? Jesus says it is the Gentiles who strive after all these things. Instead, Jesus urges us first to strive for the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things will then come to us. End quote. Spending our life pursuing wealth is not only a waste of our brief time on earth, but will certainly lead to certain disaster. Instead, we ought to focus our lives on the kingdom of God and His righteousness. Then we can enjoy God's gifts to every day, food and drink and work and health and family and friends. And most importantly, forgiveness and salvation and serving one another. The Apostle Paul urges us, rejoice in the Lord. And again I say, rejoice. Let's pray. Father, we live in a fallen world. It is limited. And yet in here you give us work and toil to do in our homes, outside our homes, in our schools, as all different kinds of stations of life. And sometimes you reward that toil with abundance, and sometimes in that toil you withhold and allow us to live in simplicity and sometimes even poverty. Teach us to number our days, to know where this is all headed, that one day it will truly end, and that the wealth that we have gained in this world, or not, will all go up in smoke. And the treasure that we have laid up in heaven will never rust, never decay. Nothing there will ever destroy it. It will be to us an everlasting treasure. Help us to live wisely and realistically in this world. Help us to live heavenly, with our eyes fixed on you, believing what you have taught us, and hoping for that great day of your return. In Jesus' name.